In an ever-connected world, scientists are increasingly working together to solve the biggest issues facing societies today. There's huge potential here, from health to energy and sustainability.
You're talking massive climate impacts.
This week on 10 Things to Know About, we're looking at how digital technology and maybe even fish could improve our mental health. There's been a substantial rise in the number of people seeking mental health support in the last few years. This is partly due to greater awareness around mental health issues and less stigma around getting help. But there are also increased risk factors from living in a fast-paced digital world. Numerous studies have shown that more mobile phone use amongst young people can lead to an increase in mental health problems like anxiety or depression. But in this new digital era that we find ourselves in, can we not use those technologies to create mental health supports too? Young adults, people living in rural areas, and members of marginalised communities may be more susceptible to having poor mental health. Laura McKittrick is working with young people seeking support in Donegal. Laura, what are some of the factors that make young people more susceptible to poor mental health?
In a rural setting like Donegal, we would often have young people who are more isolated, who maybe can't access the services, can't access the supports, can't access things they like to do. If they have, an interest in something that's maybe not in the norm or mainstream, it can be more challenging. It's important to remember that young people maybe are experiencing things for the first time, and although we all have mental health, both good and bad, young people maybe are more disproportionately affected because they're trying to figure these things out for the first time and finding ways to cope, and their skills in that area mightn't be as good as adults might be. We know that, for example, young people from the LGBTI community are more at risk of poorer mental health. Young people maybe who have a neurodiverse background, for example from autism to ADHD, etc., they may find it more challenging to cope with the day-to-day things that might occur in a young person's life. In recent past year, 2 years, that idea of displacement, we've a lot of young people coming from Ukraine who are displaced from their homes. We've a lot of young people situated in Donegal. Even homelessness in rural Ireland is certainly a factor.
What are the barriers that prevent people from accessing good mental health services, do you think?
Accessibility. In accessing mental health services, but also any service. So public transport is a challenge. Some people, for example, in Donegal, might have an hour to travel to get to Letterkenny to access a service, but also not even just services. If someone wants to access a club, a society, meet people of a like mind, that's a challenge as well.
With all the publicity around mental health, do you think there's still a stigma attached to accessing mental health services?
Things have improved in terms of stigma, but there certainly is elements, in particular rural Ireland. We have young people and families are living in very close-knit areas, so it can be challenging to reach out and say that you're struggling. Gender can be a part, young males maybe, and how they might see access and support can be a challenge, and we know that young males are vulnerable, as well as looking at cultural stigmas. We have multicultural communities, and their understanding and how they approach mental health from their backgrounds might be very different to how we do.
Laura, we're seeing that young people are spending an increasing amount of time online and on their phones. Is this contributing to the amount of mental health issues that we're seeing in young people today, do you think?
Yeah, young people are spending up on 3 hours per day and above on their phones, on social media, etc. When someone's spending so much time on that, it's affecting their sleep, and then find it hard to get up in the morning and face school or work or whatever that may be. So they're tired, they've less energy making it harder to concentrate. The other side of social media can affect self-esteem and how they see themselves and others. But I suppose it's important to remember this is the world, the generation of technology. These are people, they grow up with it, so we need to meet them in the environments that they're in, and one of them is online.
There's sort of a catch-22, isn't there? Because young people are on the phone so much, but at the same time, that's sometimes the best place to speak to them and help them.
I think it's important to remember the value of apps and the meaningfulness of which apps that young people are using, and there are just thousands of them. So supporting your young person if they are choosing to download mental health apps to look at, are they evidence informed? You know, has this been researched? And is it the right app for me? Because a lot of them are just very general. And is it the right app for what I need in that moment?
Siobhan O'Neill is working on a cross-border project focusing on the mental health of young people in rural communities along the west coast of Ireland.
Our mental health is largely about the stress that we have in our lives and how we respond to that stress. And we know that the first few years of life are critical in shaping that stress response, particularly the relationships that happen between a caregiver and a wee child and a baby. So the parents' responsiveness and the attachment patterns really influence how that child's brain develops and whether or not they can regulate their emotional response to stress whenever it comes throughout the lifespan. Those early years are crucial, but also then trauma, things that happen in our environment that creates too much stress that we can't cope with. Here in Northern Ireland, we have a generation of parents and grandparents who've been exposed to significant trauma as a result from a conflict. And one of the risk factors for poor mental health is actually having a parent with a mental health problem. So we have a lot of trauma-related mental illness in those generations, and we know now that that has created adversities for their children. The good news is that all of that can be reversed through interventions, particularly interventions in those early years.
A number of universities along the west coast of Ireland are collaborating on an exciting project that aims to increase opportunities and promote development in rural communities.
There's a series of projects really addressing areas that are relevant to being on the periphery, if you like, of Europe and being in the location that we're in. So in terms of mental health, being at a distance from the main population centres might be perceived as a disadvantage. So we've selected projects that really fit with the profile of this area and the needs of the area, and it's about the universities working together in a way they haven't done before, so it's really exciting.
Can you tell me about your project that's hoping to improve mental health services across Ireland?
Well, what we're trying to do is look at the use of digital technology and how that can be harnessed to improve young people's mental health. So at the minute we have a lot of digital health interventions. So there's apps, there's internet packages, there's chatbots, there's all sorts of things that are out there that we can use to monitor our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviours, to connect with mental health services. And our project is about gathering those together and finding out which ones work best and which ones young people particularly will want to use, and how then they can be blended with the traditional face-to-face therapeutic services. The devices that we carry around with us are also able to monitor our physiological response to stress, our heart rate, our sleep, even our physical activity patterns and our location. So there's actually ways of bringing that all together, and that gives us additional data that healthcare providers can then use to help us change our behaviour and change our thoughts and feelings, and therefore address our mental health. It's really, really interesting and important, and when you consider that lots of young people do live their lives online and through their devices, then this is really the way that we need to go here.
The Atlantic Project is just one of a number of cross-border projects that began in September. I'm meeting Deirdre Quinn to hear more about it.
So the North-South Research Programme is about funding collaborations, it's about funding researchers and ideas that will progress research on our island. We asked researchers to get together from Northern Ireland and Ireland to discuss their ideas, throw them around, see what would come out of that process.
What sort of projects have been funded, Deirdre?
So there's been a huge range of projects funded across all disciplines. Some particularly interesting ones are ones that look at challenges in agriculture, Other projects, such as how young people engaged in sport are faced with injury risk, projects addressing climate change, and also projects that look at the role of poets and other cultural activists after the Troubles. It's really important to have researchers from the whole island working together, because knowledge doesn't understand borders, but it does run into obstacles created by borders. When researchers are working together to produce ideas, to produce knowledge that impact on our daily lives and change the lives of all citizens on the island, researchers are stronger.
We have developed new services, we have started to change how things are done, and there must be a positive there, Laura.
Yeah, certainly. We're standing here in Letterkenny at the moment. In the background is St Connell's, which would have been the old mental health hospital. And with that, there would have been an idea of what mental health would have been years ago. And thankfully, that's moving on and changing, and there's more services and support. We've had a record number of referrals over the past 2 years to use our services, both in Donegal and then our online services. The increase has been substantial. So there's certainly been really positive moves in that way, and hopefully it continues.
Renaissance Europe saw a rebirth in culture and art emanating outwards from Italy. But alongside this enlightenment, an altogether more bizarre and quite literal movement was spreading across the villages in the south of the country. Dancing mania. Involving tens or hundreds of people dancing for days or weeks. It's an early example of mass hysteria, now known as mass psychogenic illness. The cause? Spiders. The cure? Everybody dance now. Spreading from person to person, musicians joined in to keep the tempo up and prolong the procession until patient zero was either miraculously cured or collapsed from exhaustion. Casting a modern medical eye back through time on tarantism reveals a web of problems. The illness spread through the population with no known infectious agent responsible for contagion. The arachnid involved was not a tarantula, but actually a wolf spider, and bites from the same harmless eight-legged creature elsewhere in Europe did not lead to dancing in the streets or being a slave to the music. Adding another example to our strange human history of hysteria. Nowadays, if you're bitten by a dangerous spider, seek a hospital, not a hoolie, and a doctor, not a DJ. See you next time.
We all know that eating a healthy diet is good for physical well-being. What's less well known is the link between diet and mental health. Now researchers are on the cusp of understanding exactly how microbes in the gut could be shaping our moods and behaviour. John Cryan is a world-leading expert in research into the microbiome-brain connection.
The microbiome, the trillions of microorganisms we have within our gut, it really has been the hottest area in biomedicine for 2 decades now. For me, as a neuroscientist, perhaps the big issues that we still remain are really trying to dig into the mechanisms. How could microbes in your gut signal to your brain and change behavior? And the second thing we're trying to do is then see how much of all of the amazing findings we have in animal models, how much will translate to the human condition.
So if we could unpick a little bit about how we understand this neurodevelopment pathway and how it relates to our microbiome, that would help us with lots of conditions.
Absolutely, and that's the beauty of using animal models. Animal models give us an exquisite tool to be able to really dig into the mechanisms. So we can understand at a genetic level, understand at a single cellular level how microbes and the chemicals that they make, how they interact with the host or the body in general.
Medical research has always looked to the animal kingdom to increase our understanding of humans and how we work. But who would have guessed that we could learn about our mental health from tropical fish? In UCC, Jatin Nagpal is doing just that. How much shared genetics or structures do humans have with zebrafish?
The estimates are we share 70% of the genes, if not more, with zebrafish. Zebrafish is a really wonderful system to study neurodevelopment, particularly because they develop externally and they are optically transparent during the early stages of their life. So it provides us with really a golden window of opportunity to study and peep into the development of the brain on the go. And the fact that the development happens externally, we could have precise control over the variables that are there in the environment shaping the development of the embryo and the brain. The external environment, you could basically deplete all the microbes that are in the environment so as to create what is called as a germ-free zebrafish, and study the effect of depleted microbiome on the development of the brain and compare it to a zebrafish which is developing in a microbially rich environment.
Zebrafish have similar brain structures to humans and exhibit social behaviours and stress responses like we do.
Social behavior and stress-related behavior are probably the two major behavioral domains that are impacted in human mental health conditions. And they are also observed in zebrafish.
And tell me about some of the experiments you're doing so to try and understand that different development.
We are particularly interested in how early life environment would shape the neurodevelopment. We are trying to investigate how stress affects the microbiome and then how then that altered microbiome state will affect the brain. Zebrafish is a freshwater fish, and in order to induce stress to the zebrafish, they can be exposed to high concentrations of salt or lowering of the pH that could alter the water environment, and that has a direct effect on the stress levels of zebrafish.
Zebrafish are social creatures and tend to stick together. However, when the environment is changed negatively, they release cortisol, a stress-related hormone, and move away from each other.
If that early life stress happens in a chronic fashion, this could then potentially later on in life affect the ability to cope with stress, respond to stress, and even behave in a social setting.
Jatin is comparing how wild zebrafish and microbiota deficient zebrafish react in social or stressful situations. By better understanding this link between the gut and the brain in zebrafish, researchers hope it will indicate whether similar signals might be manipulated in humans.
For that big arc to kind of complete, we need to invest in understanding the mechanisms of this communication. And that's where I feel simpler systems, such as fish and worms, are a wonderful system to study, because they would allow this understanding of how microbiome communicates to the nervous system. In order to, for the future, have possibilities to design microbiota-based therapies, we need to know very clearly and very deeply how that one species of bacteria is able to change the neurodevelopment and affect the behavior.
So you are trying to marry the complexity of understanding the brain with the complexity of understanding the microbiome and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, and that is a big challenge.
Yeah.
And but you know what? If we start to frame it from an evolutionary perspective, and remembering that the microbes were there first, and there's never been a time where the brain has existed without microbial signals. So when you start with that, then you can start to look across the animal kingdom. And some years ago, we started looking at this, and one of the key findings was that if you look at animals, whether it's bumblebees in a hive or baboons in the wild, that if you start changing their social structure, you start changing the composition of the microbiome, and vice versa. If you start changing the microbiome, you can start to change their social structures. And so that led us to really hypothesize that there's something about the social brain that makes it sensitive to signals from the microbiome. And that's why we apply in our lab here in Cork a cross-species approach, where we look at from the worms to fish to mice to rats to humans. We use them in the hope that whatever we find, we can come up the evolutionary ladder and be able to generalize some of these key findings in terms of how microbes are shaping brain and behavior. And just think, during the pandemic years, we changed our social behavior, we all became isolated, and we also changed our microbiome and changed our hygiene levels. So it's an experiment in action.